Hello. Today I want to talk about this book. It's called The Plot, the shocking inside story of really who runs Britain. It's published by HarperCollins and it's by Nadine Dorries or Dorries. And she was the Secretary of State for a while. It says on the back here, you think you live in a world where the elected are chosen by the people. Think again. This is the story of Boris Johnson in power and how the plans were to get shot of him right from the start, even before he won the massive landslide election in 2019. The plan was to get shot of him within the first 2 years. He managed to survive 3 years because a certain virus came along and we had a lockdown policy and then a vaccine that was magically issued. This book is an interesting read. I think it's somewhat sanitized. I don't think that Nadine Dorries is able to tell exactly the truth. There's a lot of MPs and civil servants that she talks to about this particular period. A lot of the characters that she refers to, like Dominic Cummings and Michael Gove, of course, are all names that we know, plus a whole load of others. And then there's other characters in there, perhaps names we don't know, and one very mysterious gentleman. I don't know whether gentleman is the right description for him, and he is always referred to by everybody as Dr. No, this character who is paid on the payroll but never actually materialized. Nobody's ever met him. He seems to be always on billionaires' yachts somewhere in the world, and yet he seems to be pulling the strings. This book was recommended to me by a friend and said it was an interesting inside story and it would be interesting for me to read it. And I thought, okay, I will. And I went out and got a copy and here it is. It came out, I think, earlier this year or last year, 2023, but this edition came out with extra material, basically a last chapter, really, to say how she was threatened if she published this book. She had to give up her political status. She's a columnist. She writes romantic fiction, I think, historical romantic novels as well. But she felt compelled to tell what she says is the truth behind the Boris years and how he was ousted and everybody worked against him from the start. Now, whether you agree about Boris Johnson himself and all of that, that's entirely up to you. I'll put my cards on the table. When Boris Johnson went for the premiership, I thought there was a chance that he might bring something to the Conservative Party, to government, and that we might have some hope. My hopes and wishes were dashed when the COVID came along and he locked us down, and then even more so when the vaccine was pushed forward, and of course the net zero agenda. Now, whether you can ever say that you agree with anybody at all is one thing. We've all been duped, let's say, about the net zero, about the man-made global warming. We've all been pressured into thinking that this is a reality, and the politicians, I think more so, are being pushed in that direction. Now, people on my channel will be a lot more suspicious about what government is, about the characters in government. We know that MPs generally lie. We know that they're in it for themselves. And we know that they really, on the whole, are puppets being manipulated on the stage by people higher up. We know about the Luciferians, the Freemasons, and the Club of Rome, the Trilateral Commission, and so on and so on. And we know that there is this pyramid of people who are pulling the strings. Curiously, one of the Rothschilds is mentioned once in this book, but with no allegations attached to him. The book is very much about the day-to-day backstabbing, narcissistic characters, the planning against Boris from pretty much everybody. Very few seem to be supporting him. And the key thing was to get Rishi Sunak into power as soon as possible. Well, we knew what happened then, and everybody didn't really rate Rishi Sunak in and of himself, but they really didn't want Boris. They needed Boris to get and carry on with the Conservative Party to win the general election, but then they wanted to elbow him out. It's interesting, you do get some inside information really about the workings of the Prime Minister. His diary was so busy that he had no time to question things and to see what was really going on. There were people surrounding him that were preventing anybody who might mention the truth to get to him, so that he had no idea. The Partygate, we all remember that, and held very much that Boris must have known what was going on. And there is still an element in me that thinks, well, he must have known a bit more. However, Nadine Dorries does go on. She is a fan girl of Boris and very friendly with him. It does go on to paint the picture that he didn't really know what was happening. But there was a lot of parties, sex parties, absolutely outrageous things going on in Number 10 and in the whole government, with a lot of different people going on. And it's absolutely, in some ways, it is a bombshell. If you thought that the government were working for you at any stage, then obviously think again. Now, we know this, that most viewers on this channel will know this from a slightly different perspective, from the perspective that, of course, the government is a business. It's registered on Dun and Bradstreet. We know that, as I said before, there are people pulling the strings. And these people like Dominic Cummings and Michael Gove, although they have their own narcissistic journeys and they're focused on their careers, never mind what happens to the country, it's about control and power. They are also puppets being pulled by this Dr. No. Now, we don't know who this Dr. No is, but really, if you have the knowledge and you've gone down the rabbit holes and you see a broader picture, you can see that there are these characters, these mysterious characters, who really are probably attached to this much more bigger global one world government that wants to control everyone and all the governments to make them do as they say and to place the people they want in power so that they can shift the policies they really want and not the policies that perhaps somebody like Boris Johnson would want, even though I disagree with his net zero, his levelling up and all of that. He did, it would seem, want the best for the country, even though I think some of his ideas were misguided and not really based on truth, because, as I said earlier, we've all been given the lies. And, you know, I think he's taken the fact that there is this global warming thing hook, line and sinker. Although his father, Stanley Johnson, has made some slip-ups in the media to say the national plan is to restrict people flying. It is to have people having limited amount of clothing and all the rest of it. So the Johnson family don't, in my mind, get away with everything very clearly. But you can see from this book that he was very much hemmed in, was unaware, apparently, that he was trying to be ousted, and became really a pawn in the whole workings of this government, on the Conservative government. I imagine exactly the same is going on in the Labour Party, that they seem to have the same policies, one perhaps a bit more extreme. We have Starmer now. I haven't watched anything. I don't have a television. I'm not interested. This is it's like a public school boys game, this power, this game of chess in which they are trying to get themselves higher up the greasy pole all the time. And actually, in many ways, I would say that although this is fascinating about the sex parties, the drug taking, the rapes and the various things that have been going on alleged in the book, and I don't doubt for a moment that those things were happening, and the power struggle and all of that. But in many ways, it's a distraction. If you think this encapsulates what government is really going on, I think that's wrong, and that's why I say I think it's not the full truth by any means. I think that probably Nadine knows more than she can say, more than can be published. After all the publishers are being governed by higher authorities. Let's put it as simple as that. HarperCollins would not be free to publish things they might ordinarily want to, because there is a higher narrative. And I suspect that there are a lot of legal things that she couldn't say about really who is running the country and the government. It seems all of this is a bit of a distraction to make us feel like, oh, that's why we're having all these policies thrown at us. That's why the world is not in the right place. That's why Britain is sinking down the plug hole. But I don't actually think that it has very much to do with government. There are people pulling those strings, and in pulling those strings, they're making all these MPs perform in such a terrible, incontrovertible way, in a despicable way, I mean, and that we can't rely on them, we can't trust them, that they lie, that they're all narcissistic, and etc. They've all been poisoned, basically. And as I say, this is a very, it's an interesting book, and I would recommend reading it, but just keep a mind on what we really do know about the deep state and how people have been manipulated. But it's fascinating, and it is one that you can read very easily. It's written very simply, and it gives you an insight into the sort of naughty schoolboy type world of government. And if we thought that was democracy, if we thought that these are the people we have elected, even though we know that elections and all of that is just another thing altogether, in and of itself, to the lay public, those who are not awake and don't know, this kind of thing would be enough, surely, to say we need a different way of governance. And I said that during the election. Nobody listened, of course. I didn't expect them to listen. And it seems we now have, again, the same old thing. People have gone in for the same old, we vote and our voting doesn't matter, we're all slaves at the end of the day. There'll be the theatre of power from government, and it's not really. And there'll be all the more narcissistic, backstabbing, bad things. But ultimately, the policies that the deep state want will still be enacted, and we'll see all of that. And that's where we have to get a grip on actually knowing who we are, that we are real living men and women, that these acts and statutes and the legislation and the policies that the government instigate, unless you give them the jurisdiction, unless you say you're a UK employee, none of it really concerns us and is not to us. It's not for us. It's for the capitalized name, which is not us. And I think we really have got to get to that point where we separate the legal fiction from us as living men and women and push back about the nonsense of governments being able to be higher than living men or women. But it's an interesting book, and I would recommend it, and it gives you a different insight to the nonsense and really says, absolutely, we need another system.